Thanks very much, Nigel. Before we jump into the panel, I just wanted to ask one question around Arden Cross, which is on the screen. We've worked with Muse, who are involved in the development, and I think it links really well to the theme for this afternoon in terms of social value and delivering at scale. I'm just wondering, Nigel, from obviously it's a very big master plan. We talked about the number of jobs and kind of people working and living on site. Almost, what's the thoughts been around in terms of engaging with the local community, almost the benefits that might kind of grow outside the master plan and really kind of, 2040 as a vision, help to really grow that into the future?
Wow, okay. I think that's, when you're working with schemes on this size, time becomes quite difficult because actually the first phase of Arden Cross with a fair wind will be 26, 27. And so even now, I know that doesn't sound long, but in terms of local people, that's quite a long time away.
Yeah.
So actually, I think that it's this setting these big ambitions, holding to those, being consistent with that, and then driving at them. Now, then when it comes to local consultation, local plan, and all of that good work that needs to go on, provides you a forum in which you can run that through, engaging with the local partnerships there gradually and over time, but keeping that message very consistent and clear, but building in the fact this isn't going to happen next week.
Yeah.
This is a long-term plan.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think, as you mentioned, that it's building on that work offer with the live and play aspect, isn't it? And this is a city in its own right, isn't it, given the scale you've talked about. So really exciting stuff. So if we just jump onto the next slide. I've got quite a few questions that I've noted down and thought about before, but obviously we've had 3 really interesting projects and kind of speakers. So just wondered if we wanted to see if there was any questions in the room, maybe see what the guys on stage kind of think about a few broader questions. So anyone got any kind of questions you might want to ask the panel before I kind of jump into some? But if not, have a think about some, yeah? Please.
Thank you for very good presentations. I think my first question, sorry for the challenge, is why is this panel not inclusive? Number one, it is all males panel. So if you talk about inclusive growth, I think we need to demonstrate that we should have an inclusive panel put out, number one. And number two, just coming to the question now, it is, I think we all talk about growth, which is brilliant, and I think the economic benefits are very much there, which is, again, excellent. But are the teams also thinking about how are we giving back to nature in terms of biodiversity? Because, we've really got the carbon agenda nailed, which is great. Look at all levels of carbon, decarbonization. But are we looking at those integrated outcomes right from the start, where we can really address decarbonization, how do we make it resilience against climate change? We already crossed the points.
Yeah.
And social equity, I think we had it there, but of course we can always improve on it. But it's also about, at every scale, are we thinking about, we're taking a lot from the nature, about how we're giving it back as well. So I think I'd like to get the panel.
Yeah, great question around ESG. So, Paul, I don't know if you want to go first, but thanks for that.
Yeah. First on the diversity question, that is very high up on our agenda as a Manchester Airport group. And, I'll be open about it. Our ExCo is lots of middle-aged and ageing middle-aged white men. And, that does need to be addressed. Unfortunately, if this conference was about 2 months forward, the Manchester Transformation Director that's just been appointed, Jill Fraser, would have been making this presentation, so we had demonstrated some diversity there. In terms of net zero commitments, yes, that is high up on the agenda and probably very, very important within the aviation industry, a real challenging target. Some of the things that we are doing, we're obviously incorporating a lot of new technology, if you like, to get to net zero. in our infrastructure, whether that is replacing our gas-fired boilers with hybrid boilers. So when the technology is there, we can transfer. At London Stansted, we have just signed a contract with EDF to provide photovoltaic farms. So it's, I think it's the UK largest airport photovoltaic farm that is just will go live March next year, and that gives us the opportunity not only to generate our own electricity within the campus, but also gives us the opportunity to export energy as well. We are also right in the middle of a tender. Commercials are just coming back on a power purchasing agreement again for renewable energy. So 100% of our electric supply and consumption is all net zero at the moment. Our challenge is obviously on gas, and it's also on vehicles as well. And again, we have a programme, we've made a commitment by 2038 to be net zero, and for our infrastructure to be net zero by 2030. Big challenges. And lots of investment, but nevertheless, it's a challenge that we embrace, and we'll be working with industry to support that.
Thank you. And I meant the organisers, not your companies as such. We should have more people from other organisations to make it a diverse panel, not that you didn't bring it from the company.
No. Look, it's a very fair question, and it's certainly high up on our agenda. So I have no problem answering on behalf of Manchester Airport Group.
Yeah, I do have a view. Thanks very much, Anusha. Anusha's my colleague, and that's a great question. So to your point about biodiversity and wider goals, I think there is a risk, and it's worth exploring. So HS2 is really strong in this place, and HS2 Limited will speak for themselves, but when you're talking about the railway, I think we could all be confident that the railway will be built with the highest environmental outcomes in mind. But what I was talking about was the links between HS2 Limited focusing on the railway and all of these different communities along the line of route, which may well be left to kind of fend for themselves in terms of how they develop their work. And I think there we open up a risk that if there isn't strong clienting from HS2 Limited, a real sense of what best practice looks like, the value of environmental and wider ESG outcomes from these stations, we risk lots of places all making the same mistakes and thinking that HS2 is a reason to build car-led development or to build, things that don't meet market priorities or really that just don't represent where innovation takes us. I would like HS2 to be a railway that unlocks, lots of destinations with the sorts of aspiration we heard at Interchange, but Interchange is a bit different because it's got this, excellent growth company to lead it. We don't necessarily have the same infrastructure in place along the rest of the route. So I think it is a really important point, and I think a point that we as an industry should be supporting people on and working with HS2 on and making sure those outcomes are identified. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Nigel, anything you wanted to add?
One, a real example, well, both of them I think are real examples. One is through the work we're doing on the energy side of things. Working with the airport again, they've got grand plans for a big PV farm. And what we're talking to them about is actually extending it, making it bigger because they've got the scope, they've got the scale, and actually we can invest and build more, and that would help then supply the rest of the hub. And again, it's about how we make that partnership work. I think the other point I was going to make was about your question about net zero and how we plan for that. And again, it's this point about time. I've talked a bit about Arden Cross and the scale of the ambition and that being a scheme. That's a 25-year scheme, and 25, 30 years before that really comes to its full form. And what decisions we're making now need to inform that. And actually, it's quite hard to think what have you got to build, because this is now talking about generations 2 ahead. And think about what they're going to want, what does that feel like, and how does that environment work? And the more we can think about that and try and trap that and make sure that we're using that to drive the choices we're making now, I think is really important. Now, we we're beginning to do that. We are doing that. We're thinking about it, but we can do more of it. So I think it's a really good challenge.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I think to add to that, one of my questions here as well, I think we took, the environmental sustainability aspect, but do you think in these long-term projects that social value is more on the agenda now in terms of the benefits that will be created through this large-scale infrastructure investment?
I think the answer to that is yes, it is, and I think the market can do more. And certainly I'm talking to the market again through this energy work, and you talk to the big energy providers, and actually they're saying we can do more of this stuff if you're clear, and we can help you set out what we think we can achieve. Yeah. So I think, again, there's something about the ambition there that we can push it probably harder than we are now.
Yeah, definitely. And Jonathan, any thoughts on the social value?
Yeah, I mean, again, as with Net Zero, I think HS2 Limited deserves a lot of credit. I worked on 2012 Olympics, and that was done very well. I think HS2 set the bar at a totally different level in terms of these issues, particularly on things like skills and apprenticeships and bringing young people into the labour market. They do that really well. And certainly for those of us that work in the supply chain for HS2, it's a huge part of the way that their contracts work, and rightly so. But of course, more can be done. And to me, it's the point I made at the beginning about the tendency to simplify the HS2 discussion. I wish that there was more discussion about these wider benefits and wider transformations that we will see through that project and these other, major projects that the colleagues are talking about. Because if it's done well, it will transform the way the British economy works, frankly. It'll give us a competitive advantage in years to come. That's my view.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And Paul, I think from a Manchester Airport point of view, the wider neighbourhoods and communities that live and work next to the airport campus, I guess that's a major opportunity for growth, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so, Jonathan. Look, social value, really, really important. I think as we go forward, the importance of that will accelerate. We certainly look at a project over its whole life cycle. Some real examples, I think, of where we're adding social value, and I've been in aviation all my working life, and I'm very proud to have been in aviation all my working life. I think people need to fall back in love with aviation, and we need to create, the younger generation and people, graduates, apprenticeships, to come into the aviation industry, because it is still an exciting industry. There are some massive challenges with net zero, but that's part of their excitement. One real example that we have at London Stansted, as an example, is we have, in partnership with Harlow College, we have our own college on campus at the airport, generating students through that and going through their apprenticeships, whether it's into the airline industry, whether it's into airport operations, whether it's into aerospace. So there's a real example of an education facility on the airport campus, generating futures for the next generation. And we're looking to do exactly the same at Manchester, as well at Manchester Airport. And that's absolutely critical. An airport can't survive unless it's got the community and the surrounding community on side. And it's not just about emissions and noise, it's a lot more. So they have to come to the forefront in the discussions and the consultation that we have.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks for the question, really appreciate it. So any more questions? Adam?
Yeah, look, really, really good question. There's only 3 airports in the UK, and they're Manchester Airport, so it's Manchester, Stansted and East Midlands. No. The regional network plays really, really important picture, I think. And as we go forward in future flight, there's sort of evolution, if you like, of electric flight as well. I think that all plays into the network. So there's absolutely a role for regional airports to continue and thrive. I think your point around the economic viability, that's always a challenge. Airports and how they operate, they're expensive to run and they're costly. So we need to look at that, and electric flight does offer that, because I don't have to build a 3,500 metre runway to take off. So, you know, I think that is an important consideration. And if you also look at connectivity in the UK, north-south, really, really good. Just as an example, my daughter is at university in Plymouth. To try and get to Plymouth any other way than probably road is really, really difficult. There is an airport in Newquay, but those flights have been cut or are limited. So really difficult. There are parts of the country that are only accessible actually by regional air. So, you know, that is important and has to continue, and we have to find a way to continue to support it, from whether that's government-led or whether that's industry-led.
I was going to make a slightly different point about HS2 and the impact it's having on the airport here. And from discussions with them, I mean, just the fact that it is now being built has changed the narrative there, with a number of the airline companies who have never flown to Birmingham until now, and actually, because HS2 is being built and they know about HS rail, it's suddenly becoming somewhere that they will look to fly to and from. And that then links on to the difference HS2 makes about accessibility to here. So international airport at Birmingham into Old Oak in 38 minutes. That puts most of sort of West London, North London in very easy reach of the airport here, and so changes the way you think about movement in and out of this airport, and I'm sure you'll have the same thoughts about how that might go forward. So it's just another example of how the HS2 language starts to change the way you think, and I think we can wrap the issues you start to raise here around that and think about how we make more of it.
Brilliant. And just looking ahead to some of our next speakers in terms of what the world might be in the future, I just wanted to ask you guys, before we move on to that, in terms of kind of trends. Obviously, Paul's pulled out electric aviation. Almost, maybe if you've got one kind of future trend or something that you think is going to kind of impact us in the next 5 to 10 years, be really interested to hear your thoughts.
So I think we should be more explicit about city-to-city transport as a basis of the economy. It's implicit in a lot of what we talk about, but actually the links between the cities are vital to the UK and vital to the north particularly. But, you know, building on the point you just made about links between Birmingham and London, it'll change so much that we don't understand yet. When you can get from central London to Birmingham in an hour, you can go there and back, you know, without thinking twice about it. And the same will be true all across the country as the high-speed network takes off. That will be transformational. It's an environmental point because, you know, that's all going to be carbon neutral or carbon negative travel after a certain period of time. And it's here for 100 years, 120 years. So it's going to be a massive transformation in the way the UK works, and incredibly exciting. And I only hope I'm alive to see it. That's the way it's going. But, you know, that's the fundamental change that HS2 will bring to the national economy.
Yeah, brilliant. Paul, any other trends rather than the ones you just picked out before? Yeah,
look, I mean, there are some. Obviously, net zero and the net zero commitment, I think that's huge for both the UK economy and all transport modes, not just aviation. I think the other trend that we're seeing, and there's a bit of a flip in my sort of relatively long career in aviation, where all of the sort of retail has moved airside in recent years. You're seeing a lot of retail and F&B now coming landside. So that's quite a change. Our terminals are designed to have, a processing capability, and you get airside and then you do your shopping. It is reversing. And that's one of the reasons why we're developing Airport City. That's why we're excited about HS2, and it's linked to Manchester, because the airport is becoming a community on the land side. People are coming to the airport not just to fly. There are other activities that they are taking part in the airport. So I think that's a trend that is evolving as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Nigel, any further thoughts?
I don't think they're very different to that. I think the net zero piece huge. I mean, the only question is we all have to be there by 2035, 2040. Really, on your view of that. But the question is how we get there. And there's a number of things now, and the pace of change there will drive that how. From the hub's point of view, the big issue we're having to work with is movement. So I've described the scale of growth, but you've also arrived here yourselves over the last 2 days. So you've come in by car or rail, and you've seen the amount of movement there is already around here. So we're trying to bring in effectively a small town and stick it right in the middle of a major international and national road and rail network on a local road network that is stressed. And so actually that modal shift and getting the new world we form around here to be very aware of that up front, so actually you are moving around by other means, is really important. But equally you see that as being a great opportunity here to test all sorts of things, because we have private road networks. NEC is a completely private road network, airport is. So actually we've got the opportunity to really try out some interesting things. So I look forward to seeing that as it begins to emerge over the next few years.
Brilliant. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, so if there's any more questions, please raise your hand. Tina?
Thanks, John. It's a question to all three of you. Perhaps those really incredible schemes at scale, they're perfect testbed for innovations that are to deliver this game-changing initiative. But to Jonathan's point, sometimes perhaps they're subject to a lot more scrutiny and complexity into the basics. Do you feel like you should be given, or are you given, enough mandate to leverage those schemes as a testbed for those innovations? Are you given enough of that, or would you like to see more of that? Is it mandated? Is it something you're pushing bottom up for?
Well, on HS2, I think it's a great question. I feel really positive about the environment that HS2 as a project creates. So because HS2 Limited is government controlled, they're held to the highest bar in terms of all the things we've talked about, whether it's inclusion, whether it's net zero, whether it's wider benefits of the scheme, and they pass that down through the supply chain. So as suppliers, you're incentivized to drive out savings on carbon, on all these other things. So some examples which aren't talked about enough. HS2's got a number of construction sites which are completely diesel free. They use hydrogen innovation in their technology to literally have no air emissions from these sites, which is unprecedented for major building sites in this country. Many of the designs, including some Arcadis are working on, are use significantly less concrete and emit significantly less carbon and have significantly less embedded carbon than you would normally have. So green tunnels is what they're called, and it's a transformational way of building some of the structures which are there. The same will be true in the train design and the way that the train uses electricity, and I think it does work. My biggest kind of concern is that it's not broadcast enough, and we're not actually celebrating these successes as a country and as a wider group of people working on this. But no, I think in the way the economy works, it's all about client behaviours. It's all about the role of that commissioning body, and HS2 Limited, and I'm sure the airport have an equivalent story. I think HS2 Limited should be congratulated for what they do, frankly.
Great question. Some of the investment that we've made in apprenticeships and the college is leading to that. Would I personally like to see more? Yes, I would. I think one of the challenges that we have as an airport in terms of its development, most of the infrastructure is delivered to align to growth. and therefore you've got a very, very finite time of when you can actually introduce innovation. And I think the pace of innovation that we're seeing, just thinking about the trends and the whole digital environment now and the contactless travel that is coming, there is always more that we can do. I think the other thing that the aviation industry, and I'll hold my hand up to this, airports and aviation people keep to themselves and probably don't talk cross-sector enough to understand what's going on in other sectors and some of the innovation and some of the sort of capability that there is in other sectors, and share some of those thoughts. There's only one way we can build an airport. There are other ways, and I think certainly with the digital trends, certainly with net zero, certainly with electric sort of integration, if you like, into aerospace, then those opportunities of cross-sector sort of capability are becoming far more apparent, and therefore we need to introduce that. I think relationships with academia is going to be really important going forward, not just in the UK, but also internationally, opening it up in that way.
I think what I described really across the hub, I sort of throw it back at you to a certain extent and say actually the hub is an incredible area that could become a test bed for all sorts of things. We've got some very clear ideas about that. We've had a number of innovative movement schemes already. We've had some CAV working around here over the last 18 months. So the opportunity, I think, in this area is to drive innovation. But in many ways, we don't know what we don't know. So if there are ideas there of things that we think could work here, let's hear them. Because I think the environment we're in here is there to drive that kind of change. Welcome.
Brilliant, and we're almost at time. Just a quick question to finish. I think if you had your wish of, government in terms of one thing, obviously we're getting to the afternoon now, getting a bit more optimistic. If you could take away, we can't guarantee it obviously, but if there's one thing that you could do with support or help on in order to make your project or vision a reality, what would that be? Maybe start with Paul.
Look, for me, it would be, as we've come out of COVID, to get UK government to fall back in love with aviation and recognise the benefits that aviation brings to not only to the UK, but absolutely essential to connecting the UK to the rest of the world. There is not an alternative other than getting on an aeroplane. So my call out to Rishi Sunak and the government is fall back in love with aviation. It's an important sector.
Brilliant.
I used to be a civil servant, so it's a really difficult question to answer, but I think I'd say stop interfering with the delivery plans, Minister. I worked on the Olympics. The Olympics worked because everyone thought, crikey, it's got to happen at a certain time on a certain day, and there was a different approach to risk and creativity and innovation, and I wish that ministers had learned that lesson in terms of how they approached this project.
Yeah, and empowerment, I guess. And Nigel?
I suppose it's very sort of local here, I suppose, but in terms of funding, government funding regimes are stressed, and we've got to find a way to make that work. Innovation zones, yes please. TIF, yes please. Can we have the guidance so we can actually start to get that to work? So that's really very short term to really think about how we can bring alive some of these grant schemes and use those financial tools to really unlock what I think is a really important scheme.
Brilliant. Right. Please show your appreciation for the panel.